So yoga is, I like to start off by saying yoga is different than any other form of movement. So whatever you've done in the past, hot Pilates, hot yoga, and I'm going to throw hot yoga, power yoga, Baptiste yoga, anything that falls, core power, any of those yoga styles that have power associated with them, I'm going to throw them into that batch of movement that is not similar to regular yoga. So Blue Door, my philosophy with Blue Door and with yoga is to go back to the roots and traditions of yoga. So I really want to make it that healing, meditative practice that it was intended to be. And the exercise component of it is secondary. Yes, you do move the body, but that is not the main thing that you do in yoga. That's not what you think about. So the shapes that you're making with the body have a very specific reason for being there. And I'm going to get into that. So yoga began in India about 5,000 years ago. We don't really know exactly when it began. We say about 5,000 because it's a nice round number, but also it was an oral tradition before it was a written tradition, and it was passed down from teacher to teacher. So we don't exactly know when it began. So we think it was about 5,000 years ago, and it was the same time that Ayurveda began as well. So Ayurveda, which I'm not going to get into a ton, but I think it's important to know what Ayurveda is. Ayurveda is the oldest form of organized medicine in the world. So traditional Chinese medicine and all herbal types of medicines derived out of Ayurveda. And Ayurveda is the sister science to yoga. So yoga is considered a mind, body, spirit practice. Ayurveda is the medicine, life science practice. So the two together were employed to create balance and create a whole person. So what yoga doesn't fulfill, Ayurveda comes in and it fills those seams and those gaps. So Ayurveda is a way of organizing your day, your year, your life around the natural environment. So it works with your circadian rhythm, with the times of the day, the seasons of the year, and the seasons of your life from childhood, infancy, into old age. And it teaches you what to do in each stage of your life, each section of the day, each season of the year. So it's really, really very, very fascinating. So if you don't know anything about Ayurveda, come talk to me. I'll just talk your ear off, right, Linda? Yeah, I love Ayurveda. So around 5,000 years ago, yoga came about. Ayurveda came about. We're going to stick to the yoga end of it for this series. So yoga looked really different 5,000 years ago than it does now. First of all, there was no Instagram worthy poses. There was no Beyond Yoga leggings. There was, there wasn't anything about showing off about what pose you could do and how amazing you looked in it. It was really a meditation practice. That's how it started. It was a seated meditation and pranayama, breath work practice. That's all it was. There were no poses. So what we see in yoga today looked nothing like yoga 5,000 years ago. So 5,000 years ago, there were yoga teachers. They were called gurus. And guru just really means like venerable teacher or auspicious teacher. It doesn't mean God, but a lot of people now associate it with God. It's not godlike. It's just really, it's a very accomplished teacher. So gurus would go around and they would teach yoga to the royals in India. So there were royal families in India because back then India was not a country. It was a bunch of little fiefdoms. And so each region was ruled by a king and a queen. And so these yoga teachers would go from kingdom to kingdom and teach yoga to the royal families. And like I said, that yoga was a seated meditation and breathwork practice. And so they would come along and they would teach the royals, and then they would move on to the next fiefdom. Then I don't know how many years down the road, how many decades or centuries it was, the gurus decided, this is helping the royal families so much. Wouldn't it be great if we could get it out into the general population? And I'm sure they thought of it just like that. So they said, let's bring it out into the general population. And so then they went out into the general population and they started to teach yoga to just regular people. And they immediately noticed something, that when they taught it to the regular person who had financial worries, had work that they had to balance with family and all of that stuff, they realized that coming down and sitting and quieting your mind was a big ask, and they couldn't get there. That's when the first poses started to come around. So the first poses came around, and there were very few poses, and they looked nothing like what we do today. But the first inklings of the physical practice that we practice now started to show up when they began to teach yoga to the general population. And so the reason that they came up with a physical practice was specifically to fatigue the body, which in turn fatigues the mind, which allows you to meditate. So that was the purpose for the physical practice. The physical practice was never the point. It was a doorway to the meditation. And that's exactly still what we're doing. So they realized, okay, so we need to create this physical practice to fatigue the body, to fatigue the mind, and then they can sit down and they can meditate. And that's what happened. And then, lo and behold, yoga came to the US. And that happened in like the 30s was the first time yoga came to the US, but then really in the 60s, like when the Beatles came to yoga, that's when it really started taking hold. So in the 60s is when yoga started to really blossom in the West. And that's when all of the big teachers started coming here. Krishnamacharya, Iyengar, Dasikachar, all of them started coming to the West and teaching yoga. And that's when you got more of the poses that we see today. So those poses really started coming around as the yoga that we know today. That's when it really started coming around. But back in the 30s, when they started first doing more physical poses, it was really geared towards young, prepubescent teenage boys. That's who was doing yoga in India, like in the 30s, like a rigorous physical practice. So there's a lot of different limbs of yoga, a lot of different lineages. Ashtanga yoga was the one that really was the one that first came about in the 30s, and that was taught to young, prepubescent boys. And if you look at Ashtanga yoga and how intense it is, you can see that lineage and why it started that way. So most of us who come to yoga in the ages that we are, with the bodies that we have, Ashtanga yoga is really, really not accessible to us. It is a very strong, intense physical form of yoga. And so there are, there are still a lot of Ashtanga yogis, but that's not what you'll usually find in a traditional public studio. So that is a little bit of the lineage of yoga and how it moved from pure seated meditation to what we see now. Any questions? Blowing, isn't it? To know that that's how it all started. So, I really like to start off with that so you know what you're doing when you're on your mat, that the physical pose is not the end all be all. That is just the doorway to where we're getting. Okay. So now I want to move on to the physiological benefits of yoga. So this is where I start moving into the nervous systems. So yoga, okay, so human beings, we have not evolved very much from when we were Neanderthals. So when we were cavemen, our Neanderthal era, we had a really different looking life than we have today. So I didn't live during Neanderthal times, so I can't really tell you what it is, but I'm going to go by what I think it was. So, you're sitting in a cave, you're with your community, you're with your family, you're in your social environment. We're very social creatures. That is at the core of who we are. And I'm going to go on a tangent here, but I think it's super important. I was just reading something on social media. Someone had posted this study that was done about these, and you guys may have seen this. There was a study done a while ago about these rats that had access in their cages to 2 water bottles. One water bottle just had water in it. One water bottle was laced with, I think, cocaine. And I know, sorry, Angie, you're just going to have to deal here. And so, so they realized when they gave the rats the 2 different water bottles, that they always went for the water bottle laced with cocaine, not the water bottle with just water. And so they quickly became addicted and they quickly OD'd and died because they continuously went back to that water bottle laced with cocaine. And that was the end of that study. So they said, so the finding of that study with all of its flaws was that we are inherently moving towards addiction, that addiction is our state of being, that is what, if we have the opportunity to have an addictive substance, we will move towards that. This study was recreated, and it was recreated with now a different construct. The construct was, let's give these rats something to do other than just being stuck in a cage with 2 water bottles and nothing else to do. So then they gave these rats a whole community. They could interact with other rats. They could go grocery shopping. I don't know, whatever rats do. They could go to the cafe and hang out and have tea with their fellow rats. And they still had access to both water bottles. The water bottle that was just pure water, everyone had access to this. All of the rats had access to this. And the water bottle that was laced with cocaine. Lo and behold, they found that when the rats had a community and something to do other than just sit in a cage isolated with 2 water bottle choices, they did not go towards the water bottle laced with cocaine. They only drank real water. So that goes to show you how important it is to have community and because we're social creatures. So we're back in the cave now. So I had to give you that little aside because I think that was super fascinating. And I'm glad that they reconstructed that study with real parameters this time, instead of being like locked up in a padded room by yourself, you know. Yeah, that's going to make anyone want the cocaine laced water. So then we're back in the cave and we're with our family group and we're, you know, having our conversations and like sitting there and checking each other's hair and, you know, giving each other massages, whatever the heck we did. And so we're doing all of that. That is 90% of Neanderthal life. Sitting in a cave, they're hunter-gatherers, so they're gathering up their berries and their food, whatever it is. 10% of the time in Neanderthal times was when the hunt happened. So the hunt would happen and they would go off and they would go hunt whatever animal they were trying to catch. And, you know, let's say something goes awry and they go to catch this animal and it turns around and it starts charging at them. Let's say it's a rhinoceros. I don't know. We were just watching a show on rhinos. So let's say it's a rhinoceros. And so this rhinoceros, it's running away from them and they're trying to catch it. And then all of a sudden the rhinoceros turns and it starts to charge at the Neanderthals, the hunters. And at that point is when their nervous system shifts. So I'm going to take a step back. So remember, the rhinoceros is charging towards the hunters, but I want to step away from that story and I want to move into our physiology. So the Neanderthals, and we have not evolved beyond that, the Neanderthals have two nervous systems. We have two nervous systems, just like our Neanderthal ancestors. The two nervous systems are the parasympathetic nervous system. You've heard of this. It's called the Rest and Digest nervous system. So this is the one that is working like a charm. You're eating well, you're sleeping well, you're pooping well. Poop is super important in Ayurveda. So you should never be scared to talk about poop. Because if you're not pooping well, then we got problems. And so all of that good stuff is happening. Your hormones are balanced. You're not getting sick. You're happy. You're not in any kind of disease state. That's your parasympathetic nervous system. Your other nervous system is your sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system, you've heard of it. It's called the fight or flight nervous system. So those are our two nervous systems. And we're supposed to be in the parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest mode, 90% of the time. We're supposed to be in the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, 10% of the time. So now I'm going to go back to my story about the hunters, and the rhinoceros is turning around and it's charging at them. So that is when the fight or flight nervous system kicks in and comes into play. So fight or flight, no, most people don't know this. Fight or flight, when you go into that nervous system, it has physiological ramifications. It actually changes the way your body works. So what happens is your brain starts sending these signals to your body that it's in danger. And there's only one thing that tells your brain to start shifting into the sympathetic nervous system. It's the way you're breathing. So the minute, and you know this, the minute that you kick into the sympathetic nervous system, you start breathing usually through your mouth. You start breathing shallow and you get kind of tunnel visioned, kind of sweaty, kind of like just really hot and kind of clammy, hot and clammy all at the same time. And you've probably felt this, like, think back to, I'm hoping not everyone's been here, but I'm pretty sure most of us have. Like, you think you're going to get into a car accident and you think you're either going to be rear-ended or someone's going to rear-end you or something's going to happen. And think back to that time and what you felt like when that was happening. You really hit all of those things that I just said. You started breathing through your mouth. It was shallow. You get clammy. You get kind of tunnel visioned. You really are in this state, hyper aware state, but there's anxiety associated with it. So that is your sympathetic nervous system. So that's what begins the whole process. But really what happens, the reason it's called fight or flight is you're only going to do two things when that rhinoceros turns to charge at you. You're going to stick your ground and you're going to fight, or you're going to turn around and you're going to run. Those are the only two options you have in a fight or flight situation, which is why it's called fight or flight. Well, in order for that to happen, our body actually changes our blood flow. So when you start breathing shallow through your mouth, your brain says, ooh, they're breathing through their mouth. It's shallow. We're in the sympathetic nervous system now. So it starts throwing all of these hormones into your system, cortisol, adrenaline, all of these very, very toxic hormones if they're in there for too long, but they're super necessary when you're in a state where you need to use them. And what happens is when those hormones start to flood your system, you end up with blood being shunted away from the torso into the arms and legs, because you're either going to run or you're going to fight. So those are the only things you need. So now your organs are getting minimal blood. They're only getting enough blood to stay alive in that moment. But there's no digestion happening. There's no good sleep happening. None of that needs to happen when you're going to be eaten or gored or killed or whatever. So you don't need that. You don't care if you're going to poop in that moment and it's going to be a perfect poop. Or you don't care if you're going to get the best sleep of your life, because you are going to have to either fight or run. So when your system is getting minimal blood to the organs, that's not a good thing. But if it's only for 10% of the time and 90% of the time everything's working properly, not a big deal. Well, they have found in modern society, we are in the sympathetic nervous system about 80 to 90% of the time, and in the parasympathetic about 10 to 20% of the time. Scary stuff. So imagine why we feel anxious, why our digestion is not good, why our sleep is not good, why we have all of these disease states that we have. It's because all of these hormones coursing through our body that are only supposed to be there 1/10 of the time are there all the time. Not lost. Only thing that you need to shift into the parasympathetic nervous system is how you breathe, which is why breathing is yoga. If you do nothing but breathe well, you have done yoga. So it's so important now that we know that the only cue for your body to kick into sympathetic nervous system is breathing through the mouth. It's so important to breathe through the nose. The minute you start breathing in and out through the nose, it flips a switch in your brain and it's, ooh, I'm in the parasympathetic nervous system. That's all it takes. So that is the most important thing. So if you do nothing but breathe well, you've already created a whole slew of things that'll be set in motion, that'll have a domino effect in the positive way. It'll help with back pain. It'll help with injury, because you can't get better from injury if you're constantly in a sympathetic nervous system mode. You just can't, because your body will not be sending the blood, which is our repairing mechanism, to those areas unless you're in the parasympathetic nervous system, because your arms and legs are getting it all. Okay. So I'm already out of time. It's 6:30. So I tell you, I know it always takes longer. Well, I told the rat story. I thought the rat story was super important. So I had to throw that in there, you guys. So I talked about the history. I talked about the breath. I did not get to the breath practices yet, but I'll get to them first thing next week. In the meantime, you guys have homework. I want you to notice as you move through this next week, and we meet again next Thursday, as you move through this next week, observe how you're breathing. Just observe your breath throughout the day. How am I breathing? Am I breathing through my nose? Am I breathing through my mouth? Am I breathing up in the top part of my chest? Or is it making it a little lower into the lungs? Is it by any chance making it deeper down in the diaphragm? Is it actually working? So that's what I want you to notice. That is your homework for this week. How are you breathing? How do you feel when you notice how you're breathing? Because that'll, start giving you an indication of what nervous system you're in. Okay. Any questions? Mm-hmm.
Is it as clear cut as nose and mouth?
Mm-hmm.
Or for people with deviated septum?
Yes.
Is it more also about
Yes. It does fall into that. Yes, it does also fall into, if you have to breathe through the mouth, I'm sure you can start to compensate for that and hack your nervous system as you need to. But for now, we're going to leave it as rudimentary as nose and mouth. So do you have a deviated septum? You're just
probably do.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So just notice. And if you are someone who is habitually a mouth breather because there's other physiological things or physical things going on, then how do you feel? Like, notice how you feel in a situation where there's a little more stress or anxiety versus a situation where you should be completely relaxed. Do things shift then? Yeah, but for most of us, I would say the general population, it is as easy as the nose and the mouth. Question? Yes. Mhm. Right. Yes, great point, Susan. But I also want to add a caveat to this. You can just do the and push out the belly, and you could tell that was not a good, smooth, easy breath. So yeah, so just breathing into the belly to breathe into the belly is not the point. It is that smooth, spacious, calming breath is what you're achieving. And however you get to that. And just notice what that does for your whole mental state. Okay. Good job, you guys. You made it through the first class. Yay. So this will be put up, and I will via email send you the link